What happens when a story spreads faster than the truth, and the people inside the building start pushing back? Because lately, every headline around this team feels less like reporting and more like a tug of war. One day, insiders claim the coaching staff is fully behind one quarterback. The next day, players themselves hint the opposite. Fans wake up to confident, sources say, reports, and by afternoon, those same claims are quietly unraveling online. And right in the center of it all sits a rookie who hasn't even played a full season yet, but somehow already has a full narrative built around him. This isn't just about depth charts or competition anymore. It's about credibility. When reporters, coaches, and players all appear to be describing different realities, people start asking a bigger question. Are we watching a football situation unfold, or a storyline being managed in real time? Because the strange part isn't that disagreements exist. That's normal in sports. The strange part is how often the story changes depending on who speaks last. And the moment certain comments surfaced publicly, fans realized something important. Either the locker room is chaotic, or someone outside of it keeps getting the story wrong. But once the players themselves began responding, the entire situation took a turn nobody expected. The first real crack didn't come from a press conference. It came from how people reacted after one. At first, the narrative sounded simple. Reports floated around suggesting the coaching staff had already formed a clear opinion about the quarterback situation. Certain insiders spoke confidently, almost like decisions had quietly been made behind closed doors. Fans took it as fact because the tone wasn't speculative. It sounded definitive. But then players started talking. Not directly calling anyone out, just subtle comments. A teammate mentioning chemistry still being built, another emphasizing open competition. Even veterans choosing their words carefully instead of confirming the storyline everyone online had already accepted. Individually, the quotes meant little. Together, they created tension with what had been reported. That's when people noticed something strange. The certainty existed outside the building, not inside it. Soon, clips began circulating where questions were framed in a way that assumed the decision was already finished. And instead of confirming it, responses kept sounding incomplete. Coaches spoke in general terms. Players leaned into earning reps. Nobody matched the confident narrative that had already taken over social media. Fans started asking, if this is settled, why won't anyone involved say it plainly? And then the pushback grew louder. Commentators began questioning whether some reports were interpretation rather than information. Not lies, but conclusions drawn too early. The difference mattered, because once a story becomes widespread, every normal coaching decision suddenly looks like proof of something bigger. A routine practice rep becomes a message. A missed throw becomes validation. A normal rotation becomes a controversy. The story was now feeding itself. And the rookie at the center of it didn't even need to speak. His silence was filling entire debates. People projected confidence onto him, others projected conflict around him, and suddenly every sideline moment looked symbolic. That's when the media conversation shifted from football to narrative control. Because if multiple people inside the team keep describing uncertainty, but coverage keeps describing certainty, only one side can be guessing. And the moment a few personalities openly challenged how the situation was being portrayed, the discussion stopped being polite. It became personal. That's when outside voices stopped hinting and started naming names. One segment turned the temperature all the way up. Instead of debating the quarterback battle itself, the conversation shifted to who created the narrative in the first place. A few analysts argued the coverage had crossed from reporting into shaping expectations. Not intentionally malicious, they claimed, but powerful enough to influence how fans interpreted every practice snap. The accusation wasn't that information was fabricated. The claim was that tone became certainty. According to those critics, once the idea of a preferred guy entered the discussion, every neutral update began sounding like confirmation. If a coach praised one player's preparation, it became favoritism. If another quarterback struggled in drills, it became proof. Even routine roster management looked strategic rather than procedural. And suddenly, the debate wasn't about performance anymore. It was about perception. Supporters of the original reports fired back quickly. They pointed out that insiders rely on sources, and sources rarely speak in absolutes. They argued the audience often converts probability into fact. A 60-40 situation becomes done. A developing plan becomes a finalized decision. In other words, the coverage didn't create the certainty, the internet did. But that defense didn't calm things down. Clips began resurfacing from earlier weeks, and fans dissected wording line by line. Words like likely, leaning, and expect were compared against headlines that sounded definitive. The gap between cautious language and confident interpretation suddenly looked huge. That gap became the story. Players were now getting asked about media narratives rather than football progress. Coaches were spending press conferences clarifying hypotheticals. Even teammates tried redirecting conversations back to preparation and competition, but every answer just fueled more analysis. Ironically, the less anyone confirmed, the louder the speculation became. Because uncertainty invites interpretation, and interpretation invites sides. Some fans believed the organization was quietly signaling its plan. Others believed the coverage had boxed the team into a storyline it never fully endorsed. And a third group didn't care who started it anymore. They just wanted clarity. But clarity was the one thing nobody could give yet. And the longer that silence lasted, the more pressure built, not just on the players competing, but on the people reporting it. That's when ownership finally stepped into the spotlight. Then the story crossed the line every organization tries to avoid. It stopped living in studios and started reaching the top floor. Ownership usually stays quiet during position battles. Let coaches coach, let players compete, and let preseason sort things out. But this time, the noise grew too loud to ignore. Questions weren't just about who would start anymore. They were about whether the situation had been handled properly at all. Reports began circulating that leadership wanted a clearer message delivered publicly. Not necessarily choosing a quarterback, but correcting the perception that one had already been chosen behind closed doors. From the outside, it looked like the competition had turned into a narrative vacuum, and that vacuum was being filled by speculation. And speculation was now affecting the locker room atmosphere. Players were being asked to react to opinions rather than events. Veterans were fielding questions about sides. Even routine practice rotations became headline material. The organization realized the longer ambiguity lingered, the more the team itself became secondary to the debate around it. So instead of letting the conversation spiral, a decision was made: address it directly. The message wasn't aggressive, but it was unmistakable. The competition remained open. No promises had been made. No path had been predetermined. Everything would be decided on performance, not assumption. But what mattered most wasn't the words. It was why they had to be said. Ownership stepping in signaled something bigger than a depth chart. It meant the public conversation had drifted far enough from internal reality that silence was no longer helping. In fact, silence was now being interpreted as confirmation. Fans reacted instantly. Some believed it proved earlier reports were overstated. Others felt it was damage control after narratives moved too fast. And a few saw it as a standard preseason clarification blown out of proportion by non-stop coverage. Yet inside the building, the effect was immediate. Pressure shifted. Instead of players defending perceptions, the focus returned to practice reps and preparation. Coaches could evaluate without every rotation being treated like a coded signal. The reset didn't end the debate, but it reframed it. Now the question was, who was secretly chosen? It became, who will actually win it? And that subtle change set the stage for the next twist, because once expectations reset, every single snap suddenly mattered more than any report ever could. With the narrative reset, attention finally shifted back to the one place that could actually settle the argument, the field. Practice sessions that normally pass without much notice suddenly became must-watch events. Every throw was analyzed, every rep compared, and every rotation charted by fans online as if it were a playoff game. But inside the facility, coaches weren't reacting to social media debates. They were looking for consistency, decision-making, timing, command in the huddle, the things cameras rarely capture. And that's where the conversation started changing again. Because the competition didn't play out like a movie. There was no single dominant day where one quarterback clearly separated. Instead, it became a trade of strengths. One showed sharper rhythm in structured drills. The other flashed creativity when plays broke down. Some days favored precision, other days favored playmaking. From a coaching standpoint, that's valuable. From a narrative standpoint, it's chaos. Observers kept searching for a winning moment, but none existed. Then came the closed sessions, the practices fans couldn't watch. Naturally, speculation exploded. Rumors suggested momentum swings. Reports claimed internal leanings. Yet publicly, coaches repeated the same line, evaluation ongoing. What made this phase different was how teammates responded. Instead of backing a single name, players started describing traits, leadership, communication, preparation habits. They avoided declaring a favorite and focused on what helped the offense function. That alone hinted the battle was closer than outsiders expected. Still, people wanted certainty. So every minor detail became interpreted as a signal. Who took first reps after water break? Who finished 2-minute drill? Who stayed late with receivers? Each observation fueled another round of conclusions, and most contradicted the last set entirely. The irony was clear. The more information leaked out, the less clear the picture became. By the end of the week, one thing was undeniable. No decision had been quietly locked in earlier like some believed. The competition was unfolding in real time, exactly as coaches described. But the buildup of weeks of debate made accepting that reality surprisingly difficult for many watching. And just when it seemed the story might finally calm down, a public comment resurfaced that reignited everything. Because people realized this situation hadn't only been about performance from the start. The moment that old comment resurfaced, the entire conversation shifted from competition to perception. It wasn't even a new statement. It had been said weeks earlier. But now, placed against everything that had unfolded, people heard it differently. Fans started connecting dots, comparing timelines, and asking whether opinions had quietly formed long before the first snap of practice ever happened. Online debates reignited instantly. Some believed the evaluation had always been fair, and the noise came from outsiders reading too much into routine coaching language. Others argued certain remarks sounded like expectations were already set, and the competition was just catching up to a decision that existed internally. Neither side had proof, yet both spoke with certainty. That's when media coverage amplified things. Clips were replayed, quotes were reposted, context was debated. A sentence meant to describe development suddenly sounded like judgment depending on who shared it. Analysts didn't even agree on what the message was, which only made the situation feel more dramatic than it actually might have been inside the building. Meanwhile, players kept practicing. From their perspective, nothing had changed. Meetings still happened. Reps were still divided. Installations kept progressing. But outside the facility, the storyline turned into something bigger than football mechanics. It became about trust, whether fans trusted the process, and whether the organization trusted what it was seeing on the field. Then came the most interesting reaction: silence. Instead of clarifying every interpretation, the coaching staff avoided feeding the cycle. Press conferences became shorter. Answers became simpler. Rather than denying narratives directly, they redirected focus back to preparation and improvement. That approach didn't stop speculation, it multiplied it. Because silence creates room for imagination. Rumors suggested internal disagreements. Reports claimed preferences were forming. Others insisted nothing unusual was happening at all. The truth likely sat somewhere ordinary in the middle, but ordinary rarely wins attention online. And that's when observers noticed something subtle. The players themselves began blocking out the noise. Interviews turned neutral. Responses avoided comparison. Even body language looked less reactive to outside opinions. Which led to a realization. The biggest battle wasn't just about who performed better anymore. It was about who handled the pressure surrounding the decision. And as the days moved closer to the inevitable announcement, one final factor started to matter more than throws, stats, or rumors: how the offense actually responded when the pace increased and mistakes carried consequences. Once practices intensified, evaluation stopped being theoretical and became visible. The tempo increased, play calls sped up, and suddenly decisions had to be made in seconds instead of minutes. That's where the real separation usually happens, not during clean drills, but when timing breaks, protection shifts, and the play doesn't look like it did on the whiteboard. Observers began noticing a pattern. One quarterback leaned into structure. Reads were quick, throws were safe, and drives stayed on schedule. Coaches often value that because it keeps an offense stable. But at the same time, there were fewer explosive moments, fewer plays that changed momentum instantly. The other leaned into reaction. When pressure arrived, he extended plays, bought time, and tried to create something beyond the design. Sometimes it worked beautifully. Other times it didn't. Yet those flashes stuck in people's minds because they hinted at upside rather than reliability. And that created the toughest decision possible. Coaches weren't just picking a starter, they were choosing an identity. Stability or unpredictability, efficiency or playmaking, immediate comfort or long-term ceiling. Fans saw highlights, but internally, the debate likely revolved around risk management. Then came the scrimmage sequences. Situations were simulated. Late drives, third and long, red zone pressure. Mistakes suddenly mattered more than good throws. A perfect pass after a blown read didn't count the same. And a safe checkdown at the right moment carried more weight than a deep completion at the wrong one. Reports coming out afterward sounded carefully worded. No clear winner announced, yet certain phrases kept repeating: command, situational awareness, and decision-making. Those terms usually signal what staffs prioritize when the roster is still forming. But fans focused on a different detail. Teammates' reactions. Who huddles gathered around. Who receivers instinctively adjusted routes for. Who the sideline energy followed after big plays. None of it officially determines depth charts, but chemistry often influences how comfortable a team feels behind a leader. And that's why the decision grew heavier. Because now it wasn't just performance or narrative, it was locker room rhythm. Coaches had to balance development with confidence, making sure whichever direction they chose wouldn't fracture belief inside the team. As the final practices wrapped up, everyone sensed the announcement was close. Yet instead of leaks, the organization held firm. Meaning the first real answer wouldn't come from rumors, analysts, or speculation. It would come the moment the offense walked onto the field with one voice leading it. The first preseason game finally removed the safety net. Practice performance always carries an asterisk: familiar defenders, scripted looks, controlled tempo. But once the stadium lights came on, everything sped up. Pass rushers didn't pull up, coverages disguised themselves late, and the clock suddenly became the biggest defender on the field. From the opening series, you could feel the difference. The offense started cautiously, leaning on short concepts and quick timing routes. The goal was clear: settle the unit, avoid early mistakes, and establish rhythm. The ball moved, but methodically. No panic, no chaos, just controlled progress. Coaches often script those drives to evaluate discipline more than explosiveness. Then the unexpected happened. A protection broke down on a 3rd and long. The play design had no answer left. For a split second, it looked dead. Instead of forcing a throw, the quarterback drifted outside, reset his feet, and delivered a strike past the marker. Not flashy, not reckless, instinctive. The sideline reacted immediately. That moment mattered more than the stat sheet. Because preseason isn't really about yardage totals. It's about reaction under uncertainty. Anyone can execute a clean read. Far fewer can recover when structure collapses. That's the kind of play staffs rewind repeatedly in film sessions. Later came the red zone drive, the most telling sequence of the night. Compressed field, faster defenders, windows closing instantly. One possession stalled after hesitation, ending in a safe throw short of the goal line. The next opportunity, however, showed adjustment. Quicker recognition, confident release, touchdown. Same situation, different decision speed. And that contrast sparked conversation. Not about who looked better overall, but who adapted faster. Coaches prioritize improvement within the same game because it shows processing, not memorization. A player correcting mistakes live proves he's learning, not just executing rehearsed plans. After the game, interviews stayed predictable phrases like "good competition" and "we'll evaluate the tape." But body language told more than words. Teammates congratulated big plays naturally, not performatively. Energy flowed toward execution, not reputation. Still, the numbers themselves didn't settle the debate. Both quarterbacks had positives, both had missed opportunities, which meant the coaching staff's decision would come down to philosophy again. Floor versus ceiling. Trust versus projection. Because the preseason didn't crown a clear winner, it clarified what each option represented. And now the decision wasn't about potential anymore. It was about which direction the team wanted its season to take from week 1 onward. And that's where everything circles back to the real question. Not who had the cleanest stat line, not who won a single night, but what identity the team actually wants to commit to. The preseason didn't deliver a dramatic knockout. It delivered clarity. One option offers stability, structure, and predictability, the comfort of knowing roughly what the offense will look like every Sunday. The other brings volatility, creation, and the ability to rescue plays that were never supposed to survive. Coaches always say they want balance, but eventually every staff has to lean in one direction, because the locker room feels it, the play caller feels it, even the defense feels it during practice. And once a team chooses that direction, the noise outside stops mattering. Media debates will keep spinning, depth charts will keep getting dissected, every throw will still get overanalyzed. But inside the building, decisions become simpler after moments like this. Not perfect, just clearer. The preseason didn't answer every question, but it exposed which player changes how the offense breathes when things break down. Now the conversation shifts from who looks good to who can carry the weight when the plan fails. Because once week 1 arrives, there are no controlled environments left, no scripted protections, and no patience for indecision. Only results. And whichever path the team chooses won't just decide a starter. It will define the season's entire personality.